Welcome into SportsMap.com. I'm Joel Blank of the Press Box on ESPN 97.5, joined by AJ Hoffman of the Blitz on ESPN 97.5. Let's talk some baseball, AJ. Jon Heyman, noted MLB writer and Twitter aficionado, gives Dusty Baker credit on your Houston Astros and the success that they've had despite all the injuries. But with all the things that the Astros have been through, isn't it more about Brent Strom really molding and shaping a young pitching staff than it is about Dusty Baker and the things that he's done?
I mean, I guess Dusty as the manager is going to get credit when you're just painting in broad strokes. I do think Brent Strom probably deserves a lot of the credit. It'd be nice if Brent Strom spent some time with the bullpen guys because they all are still not very good. But the Astros have been on a nice run, and you know they deserve some credit. I guess whoever they're getting credit from is noteworthy at this point because typically the national media has been slow to give them any credit for anything. I agree that Strom is sort of the key and sort of the only way the Astros are going to be relevant because they need guys to pitch over their heads. And so far, so good, at least with that starting rotation. Those guys are pitching way over their heads.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the Astros may have jumped the gun on one thing, and that's giving Dusty Baker that second year and picking up that extension because he was everybody's hero because he was willing to have his teams back when they wanted to fight the A's. But overall, Dusty Baker is Dusty Baker. He's not an analytics guy. He definitely has a hard time pulling pitchers and doesn't know when the right time is to either leave a guy in or take him out. And overall, Strom and what he's been able to get these young arms to do, and we talk about the likes of Framber Valdez at a 1.72 ERA, a guy that couldn't find the zone consistently a year ago, but then the Brandon Belaks and the Andre Scrubs and the Blake Taylors and the Christian Javiers, they've weeded themselves out to being the success stories. But I don't know how much you attribute that to Dusty Baker. I don't know how you feel about where they are in terms of if Dusty's extension should have been picked up for another year. But if I'm James Click and I'm an analytics guy and I've got a long-term deal, don't I want my manager in there in the long term?
You would think so. I will say this, giving Dusty Baker any credit for developing young pitching is probably, it goes against everything that he's ever been. As you know, there's time and time again, there's stories of him just burning young pitchers down to the ground, no matter how much potential they had. Mark Pryor may have had more potential than any pitcher in the last 20 years, and Dusty Baker basically ruined his career. So I don't really understand the extension. There may be something behind the scenes. Maybe the players like Dusty. I don't know, or it may just be the Astros' way of kind of calming the flames around them and saying, listen, this is our guy. He's a safe guy. And Dusty is a really safe manager from a PR standpoint. And maybe they feel like that consistency is something that they need right now.
I know you referenced the fact that there were some question marks about the bullpen, but the biggest question mark going into the season had a lot to do with the rotation. How good do you feel about the rotation? I mean, look, they've got all these young arms that I mentioned. You could potentially have Verlander back as he threw off a flat surface this week but didn't experience any setbacks. And we still got Jose Urquidy somewhere waiting in the wings. If they are going to be in the middle of a playoff hunt and be one of those playoff teams, it seems like, at least from a starting pitching perspective, they're way better off than people thought at the start of the season.
They are, and it's sort of made up for the fact that a lot of the guys they expected to get, production from with the bats has not been there. So if you told me Altuve and Springer were going to be sub 200 guys, you told me Alvarez was going to be done for the season, Bregman hits the IL today, and they're still winning some games, you'd say, well, the pitching obviously had to be great. And Zach Greinke, I mean, we've all known Zach Greinke's a great pitcher. I don't think anybody thought that at this point in his career he'd look the way he's looked so far, but he looks like one of the best pitchers in the league again. I still think that there's going to be a regression to the mean for some of these young guys because I don't think that they're all, they're not the best. It's not the best rotation in baseball. But so I think they'll fall off some. But I think with that, the bats heat up a little bit as the season goes on, and maybe things sort of even out for them.
So they've only lost one game since they were swept by the A's, and that included that big scuffle. And we know that going into the season, they were the clear-cut favorites. Was that a wake-up call? One, because the A's handled them on the field from the game's perspective, but two, because of the scuffle that ensued and the controversy that went with it, that maybe it was a complete fire under their rear end to say, this isn't going to be a cakewalk this year. We've got work to do, and maybe it's worked to this point.
Could be a little bit of both. I think that We also should consider that, of their 10 losses, 5 of them came against the first place teams in the AL West and the NL West. They're 0-5 against the Dodgers and the A's that look to be the 2 best teams that they're going to see this season. Until this Rockies series, which the Rockies were looking good coming into this series, until this Rockies series, really every win the Astros had was coming against bad opponents. But they've also been, they've come in different ways, which I think is kind of promising. We've seen the 2-1 wins. We've seen the 1-0 wins, and then last night you get the offensive explosion that we've kind of been waiting to see. You put up 11 runs, and if you can, you give me 3, 4, 5 runs, I feel like this rotation is going to hold up pretty well. It's tough to win when you're scoring 1 or 2 every game, but it seems like maybe they're starting to turn a corner here. I don't know if that A's series really lit a fire under their ass. I like to hope it did. But I guess we won't really know until they play the A's or the Dodgers again how they'll hold up against the top-tier competition.
I think better chance of a silver lining in the entire scenario is the fact that, as you mentioned, even the games they're losing are either extra innings or they're losing 1-run games. They're not getting their doors blown off on a consistent basis, even with all the injuries, all the shortcomings in the lineup, the question marks around the pitching staff. I think if there's any silver lining for me, it's the fact that even when they're losing, they're tight games down the stretch or in extra innings where they're in the ball game, and that's all you can ask for of any team, regardless of their situation, let alone the situation the Astros have faced from the get-go with the scandal and everything else.
Well, I mean, based on what we've seen the last 3-4 years, the Astros shouldn't be getting their ass kicked. I mean, they still, regardless of all the nonsense that went on in this offseason, they still went into this season as one of the best teams in baseball. They should be playing well, so giving them credit for even when they lose, not getting their asses kicked. I mean, I would hope they're not getting their asses kicked because this was supposed to be one of the best teams in baseball. And after a pretty disappointing start, it looks like maybe they're starting to turn into what we expected them to be. Now, what the real Astros is, I guess that's going to play out over the course of these 60 games. But it is promising that right now it looks like maybe they're starting to turn some things around.